have identified some very, very interesting anomalous type of aircraft.
Traffic is quite luminous and is exhibiting some non-ballistic motion, over.
Move very rapidly at any speed or rather any direction it wanted to go. Fly could change and go to the right or the left or go crossways without hesitating a bit.
What do you think it was?
Well, if they call it a flying saucer, that's what it is.
EWA 517, do you want to report a UFO? Over.
Negative. We don't want to report.
Look, it wasn't my worst Wednesday night.
Good evening, everybody. This is Smiles Lewis.
And Mark Jackson. Good evening, Smiles.
Hey, Mark. It's good to see you.
Good to see you, too.
Welcome, everybody. This is the March 17th, 2021 installment of the weekly Anomalous News Roundup here, Anomaly Now from Austin, Texas. This is the weekly show of the 501c3 nonprofit Anomaly Archives Scientific Anomaly Institute. And thank you so much for joining us. You know, just random aside, I know in our Flipboard links, there is a Canadian ufologist, astronomer, media guy, Chris Rutkowski, who we've had on the show, has an article about the reality, or at least the rumors surrounding alleged alien spacecraft debris, and how that's kind of the loose basis for this new TV series called Debris, which really, you know, so far just seems like it's kind of like, oh, X-Files meets The Fringe meets inspiration from quote unquote recent UFO history, UAP history with the government's revelations and so forth. And also seemingly inspired by the the space Oumuamua, the space rock that may have been a spacecraft, according to some, that went through our system a couple of years ago.
Avi Loeb, the Israeli scientist, I think he's the one that came out and finally said, look, this thing doesn't have the profile of a skinny rock. It's very flat, which is very rare in the cosmos, blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, I think that's what that's part of. Yeah. Your thing about the materials aspect of it, that was that gal from Rice that wrote the book, the professor from Rice University. I forget her name now. But she had a book out where she was supposedly taken in the desert, blindfolded by some upper echelon folks in the aerospace industry, et cetera. So I got to believe Rutkowski is kind of like riding on the coattails of some of that momentum that was built through that book. That's
Diana Walsh-Pasulka's
Thank you, Miles.
American Cosmic. I think that's the title. And she's fascinating in the religious studies world. We've, of course, commented about her. But what I was getting to is, so I've been watching this new show, Debris, and I'm of course, as much as I'm interested in the facts or the perceived realities of these phenomena or people's beliefs in these phenomena and their realities, I'm always interested to see how mainstream media and entertainment incorporate that into, you know, the popular culture through storytelling. And so I've been watching this Debris show, and sure enough, there was this really interesting moment for me where one of the characters is speaking, one of these government agents, I think he's CIA Langley. He says something to the civilian, is like, oh, we're with a branch of the government that studies scientific anomalies, which of course, I'm like, hey, we're the Scientific Anomaly Institute.
Hey, over here.
And while scientific anomalies is an interesting way of thinking about these things, it's a phrase that I don't hear uttered exactly like that very often. And so, there's the article. Thank you, Victor. And it tickled me. And I'm enjoying the series, even though it doesn't seem that. It's trying to go for kind of like a spooky, you know, weird, dark X-Files angle. But another similar but completely different end of the spectrum is this Resident Alien, with the actor who plays the pilot from Firefly, one of my favorite science fiction series. I'm blanking on his name, but I think the last episode I watched, they have a shot, the infamous, one of the infamous now Navy UFO footage. And so again, just this seeing quote unquote real world UFO stuff, UAP stuff woven into science fiction. I find it fascinating to see how that plays out and how it gets repackaged, repurposed, and so forth. So, folks can go to anomalyarchives.org, and they're on the sidebar, depending upon if you're browsing through a desktop or on your phone. Just look for the Flipboard links, and you can go and see all the links to the news articles that we'll be covering tonight, as well as many, 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 many more. And so much to cover. I would love, there's just every one of these articles on the Flipboard has something I'd love to comment on, but we only have a very limited amount of time.
Well, you send them out ahead of time, and I'm at work, and then it's like, am I really working anymore? I'm making excuses, especially when you send them over email with the links. Then technically I'm on my email checking things. Anyway, there's a gray area in there, but I appreciate the respite from the real world.
I hear that there have been studies proving that employees work better and harder if they're allowed some flexibility in their use of social media while they're on the job.
I don't know if that's true. I think it is.
Sure. Yeah, I'm going to go with that.
Let's make it so.
Yes. Real quick, I did want to honor the memory of a good friend, Jim Beal. This fellow was a true treasure, and he still is, because he's still around us. He's part of the energy and the information of the universe. I believe it was in the mid 90s or late 1990s when I had the pleasure of first meeting Jim Beal. Of course, in the 90s, I was publishing my own zine called ELF Infested Spaces, Elf Infested Spaces, because I was obsessed with not just Terrence McKenna and his Elf Infested Spaces ideas, but electromagnetics and the good, the bad, and the ugly as to their potential use, misuse, abuse for human physiology and the environment at large. And Jim Beal is an electromagnetics expert. That's how I think he came onto my radar. He was, I met him through a speaking engagement when he was talking at a local IONS group, the Institute of Noetic Science, founded by astronaut Edgar Mitchell. And I came to know Jim and his electromagnetics knowledge and his voluminous knowledge on all things esoteric, and both engineering and mysticism. He was an engineer who worked with NASA in the early days, helping get us to the moon. He had patents. I think he had created a new way of welding aluminum that I think, if I'm remembering correctly, involved electromagnetic fields to help increase the strength of those welds. And we'll post a link to that video there by our good friends, the Robesons, who put out their "What If It Really Works" series of interviews with luminaries in the fields of esoterics and mysticism, metaphysics. And but Jim was just a great guy, and I was so glad to have met him and to know him. And we came to be good friends. He and his wife Roberta, wonderful couple, and they were intimately involved in the 70s and 80s and onward New Age movement, and part of very close confidants of the people at the heart of the Monroe Institute, Bob Monroe, the guy who was seminal in trying to turn into a technology the ability to go into an altered state, such as the out-of-body experience or astral projection, as some know it. And anyway, at some point, Jim became such a good friend, and I was really wanting to help him as much as I could. And for a time, I was hosting and maintaining his website, emfinterface.com.
Okay.
Still up today. It hasn't been updated in a long time, and I haven't been involved with it in a long time. And sadly, over the last few years, I wasn't able to really interact with Jim as much as I would have liked to. But he and Roberta always showed up for all the Anomaly Archives events and the other many different consciousness connections events held here in the Austin, Texas and Central Texas area. And it was such a pleasure to, again, sit in on a memorial that was honoring somebody who had touched so many lives. that's I guess what I wanted to say.
I'm glad you knew him, Miles. That's great. I didn't know that you knew him. I saw it up on the board and had no idea what the history was there. So thanks for sharing. That's great.
He was active with all these local groups, this local consciousness community here in Austin, and he was helping keep it weird. That's for sure. He was a light and a gem and a gentleman. So,
well, Miles, my first introduction to Jim was through a phrase that caught me during an interview, and that was the disruption to the time constant. And that just like blew my mind. I was like, okay, wait, what is this? What is he talking about? It turns out he derives from, if I'm remembering this right, he's deriving this phrase from the 9/11 event, where there were multiple psi studies going, where random number generator studies were operating in the background right before 9/11. And they had a very consistent or anomalous sort of data output from these number generators that preceded the actual events of 9/11 on a scale that was not probable, essentially. And so what if I remember this right, the disruption of the time constant notion is that for the first time in history, we collected data that probably electromagnetic waves were generated through precognition, I think is what he would call that, and was recorded for the first time. And of course, we always think about time as being a constant. You can't go forward or backward. But this data suggests there was an alteration in that constant, in that we registered an event before it happened. And, it took me a long time to unpack that, but that was like my introduction to Jim, and just was like, here we go.
Yeah, and that's a whole other area that is something that he and I used to talk about. And they're actually one of those random number generators that was part of that network and that series of ongoing experiments. And they're still running. I think they've expanded their network worldwide, but it's the Princeton EDU Noosphere project. It's got a global consciousness project, GCP. I think it's got a couple different names, but it's an ongoing experiment, and they seem to have some evidence that these random number generators seem to go off random in time, and sometimes ahead of time, as in the case of the before the planes hit the towers, in that case with the 9/11 event. That's yet another fascinating area of study. And what a phrase. Well, in among the news articles that we're going to post the links to for tonight's show includes this idea of the Department of Defense versus the Freedom of Information Act. We've covered so much of this research by people like John Greenewald with the Black Vault, and there's just always so many others that are doing the yeoman's work of petitioning the government to tell us the truth, or at least to give us the documents that might help us understand the nature of what's really going on. And sure enough, this researcher over at that website that we just saw there, I think it's UAP Research, has been in contact with. Oh, I'm sorry. No, that's parallaxuap.blogspot.com. That's how the DOD is keeping tabs on UAP-related FOIA requests. And the fellow there, whose name I am blanking on, Sasodi, I think, is been doing work inspired by John Greenewald, who he has
the Black Vault, of course.
Right. Yeah. So he's been in contact with John and trying to get some tips on how to do the same kind of research, and that's great, because we need people like this communicating so that they're not duplicating effort, and that they're sharing that information. And of course, John Greenewald has also published about this as well, when the freedom of information and public affairs collide on the UFO issue, and it's fascinating as always. So in this constant look for information, they started getting, of course they go after emails and not just documentation in the classic sense of white papers and printed reports and whatnot. But they've been looking into these emails, and they've started noticing that the Department of Defense's Office of now I'm drawing a blank. The Naval Safety Center. Let me see if I can find this. The record quote. This is from Greenewald's article. The record was obtained by Mark Sassotti, a FOIA researcher who blogs about his experience at his site called The Parallax. It was one email out of a string released as string released as obtained from the Naval Safety Center and the Office of the Secretary of Defense, OSD. The email was sent on July 10th in response to internal banter about a media inquiry. And basically, it just goes into this idea of, and I'll quote the government official, also, quote, generally speaking, we let the normal FOIA process work as it's supposed to, but we have been requesting that FOIA offices coordinate with us on UAP-focused FOIA responses before they hit reply so that new terms, language, etc., aren't introduced that complicate the overall messaging efforts. And the point here is that John and this other researcher who discovered this are noticing that the Office of Public Relations now is involved in this. And on the one hand, I can is involved in interceding in trying to shape the message being released through the Freedom of Information Act, which the FOIA thing is just so like basic. It's like freedom of speech. Obviously freedom of speech has constraints as far as not yelling fire in a crowded theater, that kind of thing. But this idea that they want to massage a message that is specific to UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, it just kind of draws into question, like, what is the message? What are they trying to direct here? And skeptics or suspicious or paranoid people like myself have long wondered about, this new push with the revelation of the Pentagon's program and now the Navy having its own new reporting mechanism. And then this thing that we're waiting for about a report on UAP from the government that's supposed to come out soon. Yeah, Mark?
Well, I'm definitely a skeptic. I'm in your camp. But here's the thing. I mean, what they're just admitting now, that they're trying to buffer or filter out some of the information that's leaking through this, FOIA mechanism. I think that's a little bit, I'm skeptical of that's just started. The other thing is, I think when you research a lot of this stuff, a lot of folks end up at the same spot. And that is, there's a realization that most of the most top secret or the John Greenewald's Black Vault actually resides within the private sector, which sidesteps the FOIA process entirely. So if you really want to keep something under wraps or covert, et cetera, budgets, technology, information, and the like, you need to get confidentiality, NDA agreements in place, et cetera. And, you just take it into the private sector and you're immune from all of the public access mechanisms in the government. So, on one hand, I guess to the novel, researcher, it seems like this would be a very useful tool, but you get to a point where it's kind of like, okay, there's these redundancies that have been baked into this process long time ago, where access has been very restricted. And so I'm skeptical because there's just a lot of evidence to suggest that's how this game is being played.
Yeah. And I've of course heard a lot about this idea of eluding access, the public's access to documentation via FOIA by doing like what you're describing, compartmentalizing it, not just in government black programs as where we can't get the FOIA stuff by nature of it being a black program, but outsourcing, contracting, and that sort of thing. I have heard some contradiction to that assertion, but to me it seems highly likely that happens at least to some degree. And that's then. So yeah, you're going to petition the Bigelow's aerospace company, and
I was going to bring that up. The Skinwalker Ranch. John Greenewald did this really great piece on the information that was isolated behind the whatever paywall of Skinwalker Ranch and everything that took place there, and the amount of government money that was being funneled into there through the decades. So I think that's a great name drop to demonstrate exactly what we're talking about. I mean, you can't separate private NDA / black budget money more so than Bigelow, because it's like a unkept secret or something, his involvement in all this stuff. But anyway.
Well, we're going to keep an eye on that as we continue to report on the ever-evolving news coverage of revelations regarding the government and the military and the UAP UFO phenomena. So we'll see where that all leads. But yeah, to some degree, I agree. I think in a lot of ways, I used to joke. I think I actually may have said this to Stanton Friedman once at a lecture. Was like, well, don't the Illuminati have paper shredders? Joking. Yes.
They had scanners. They had scanners long before us, and they also had Word to PDF converters, long before us. But.
So on the subject of ancient human civilizations, we've got a couple of interesting headlines, and this. So let's start with this something that people don't think of like as a technology, a woven basket. Like, okay, what does this tell us about the ancientness of human civilization? Well, I just find it fascinating, this idea that something that kind of fragile could have survived for what, 10,000 years? Like that just seems incredible. And in this article, they go so far as to say, well, we can also tell that it was crafted by two different people, one of whom was left-handed. I guess you can tell by the way the way of the weave or something. But they're still trying to discover like what maybe was stored in it, because they think that's what it was there for. It was stored. It was for storage of things, and it was stored in caves. And the other interesting aspect of this, besides just the sheer age of this, and I guess what I really want people to think about with regard to a story like this is just to really imagine how old humanity is. Because, okay, whether they had aqueducts or electricity or solar panels, the fact that you're weaving baskets and you're storing things in them and you're putting that in the storage place that's like a cave for future use, I mean, that's just basic human existence. And I don't think people really have a clue. They just don't think about the fact that we've been on this planet for so long. And more often than not, I'm harping on other discoveries that just keep putting human civilization further and further back, and 10,000 years is not that far back compared to some of these discoveries of things that make you go, whoa, how is that possible? That totally changes everything I was taught in school. But that just keeps happening and happening and happening.
But Miles, that's a reflection of the scientific community's predisposition to ignore evidence that, we'll use the term again, that's anomalous to what the convention is of any given period, right? So, I would say that the actual date of human, or what we would consider to be modern human civilization, is an order of magnitude greater than 10,000 years, something Absolutely. More like 100,000, yes. 150,000. And then there are some claims, there's some wild claims that we're talking a quarter, 500,000 years. And there's a lot of geologic evidence to explain how that could be possible. Let's take the basket, for example. We know today that there are Asian continents, African continents, American continent civilizations that still use baskets as their preferred modality for moving things around. All you have to do is take plastics and the hydrocarbon industry out of any given civilization, and you're basically at the woven basket level. So you're basically talking about one technology that boons this other sort of modality that moves away from organics like woven things or plant-based materials into this sort of synthetic material thing. And then we have to realize that, in NASA, they were building space shuttles, and then people are still using woven baskets. So there's not only is there a time disparity between the use of different material sciences, but there's also a geographic component to this too. So we can't get too locked into this notion that the entire globe has adopted one technology simultaneously. They're independent of each other based on geography and time, like I was mentioning. In fact, there's some theories that the Scandinavian languages were born out of isolation from the rest of the world, the Roman cultures or the Latin-based languages, due to glaciation. And they spent 10,000 years isolated from the rest of the world, which is why they have their language that's so different from every other language on the planet. So you can even look at language as a technology and the way physical and temporal barriers have caused these changes and very different approaches to everyday use.
And so if we juxtapose that to this other series of stories, and again, this doesn't push it back as far as what you're saying some of the speculation goes, and I agree firmly that there definitely seems to be evidence that I find very compelling that has human civilization, human technology of a sort going much further back, even further than 10,000 years. And I'm no expert on that area, but this other story about the Antikythera mechanism. This is one of those mysteries that's just been sitting there for so long, discovered during a dive off the coast of Antikythera, a Greek island in the Aegean Sea. This is a Roman era shipwreck where they found this mechanism. It looks like a clock or something like a clock. And but it's so much more complex, and the more people have dug into this and x-rayed it and done all these different scans over the course of the last 100 years or so, more and more information keeps coming about. But the dating of it appears to be dating back more than 2,000 years, and it is considered to be like the earliest analog computer that really gives us an insight into the cosmological view of the people of that time. But this device apparently had a series of rings that charted the motions of Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and the known planets of the time, as well as the path of the sun, the phases of the moon, and positions of the zodiac, and apparently Olympic events. So this, but this, one has to wonder. This would seemingly, because there's nothing else that we found quite like it in this time period, then it seems like a true anomaly for that time period. Like, how could somebody in that era have such a device? I mean, clearly they would have been, an elite or a wealthy family or something. But it's just been fascinating, and now they seem to have come to some conclusions about it and have a better idea of the nature of it. And it's just one of these, like, wow, it only took 100 years or so to understand it.
But a great example of how on one side of the planet you could have a highly advanced civilization, and at the same time on the other side of the planet you have a very a very antiquated or indigenous or whatever, choose your descriptor there. But again, this disparate nature of distribution of technology, this is a great example of it. And I really love the continuity across the stories in the Flipboard, and the fact that you isolated these two, because for everybody out there, if you want to get a better sense and dig a little further into this and try to understand the simultaneous nature of some of these technologies in either the advancement or the lack of advancement, here's a great reference for you. And that's kind of what we do here at the news, updates, etc., each week. And so thanks for that, Miles. Great examples.
Yeah, the article over at Vice ends with, unless it's from outer space, we have to find a way in which the Greeks could have made it. That's the next stage. And the exciting bit is, I think that's the final piece of the jigsaw. So the mystery still has a few corners left untouched. So and then, I guess, why don't we end the show with, we've got about 4 different links in the last week or so's roundup of news headlines over at the Flipboard that focus on parapsychological or paranormal oriented scientific investigations. There's the one we have there up on the screen, which is linked over at sciencedirect.com, Genetics of Psychic Ability, a pilot case control exome sequencing study. I don't know that much about this. I did see Dean Radin's name in there, which makes me excited. Of course, he's just one of the more well-known parapsychological researchers among many who are doing the hard and often boring behind-the-scenes work on good science. At least we hope it's good science. Of course, this isn't linked in this week's Flipboard, but it reminds me of the work of Gary Nolan, who has worked with everybody from Stephen Greer to Bob Bigelow and NIDS, and who has also been looking into the possibility of genetic markers that are indicative of people who've had close encounters, abduction, paranormal UFO type experiences, and possible brain structures that might have some kind of antenna effect. But some of the other links, one is they're looking for subjects in the Windbridge Afterlife Acceptance and Validity Surveys, WAAVS, WAAVS. There's a link there that we'll post in the show notes. And then there's a couple of flashbacks to some older research with the Gansfeld experiments. These are fascinating experiments that I've always been excited about because it has to do with classic ESP and the Ganzfeld. You can always, if you're wondering what Ganzfeld means or is, ping pong balls on the eyes. That'll usually ring the bell. But the Gansfeld experiments usually had somebody in a rested state in a secluded room with halved ping pong balls over their eyes and some other kind of light or sound to kind of create a calming background. And these usually involved a sender. It's kind of like remote viewing, but before remote viewing was really being practiced, I think. Anyway, the link we have there is actually from an article from back in 2013. And this was a really interesting explication of the history and some of the critiques from skeptics who were like Ray Hyman, I think, who was very critical of the methodology and the author of the research that he was critiquing. They went back and forth, but then they got together, and even though they didn't come to a conclusion about the nature of the data, they did come to agreements about the deficiencies of the research methodology. And so I thought that was a good example of how these two sides can get along, even if they don't agree on the interpretation of the results. And then lastly, our friend Brent Rains over at Alternate Perceptions magazine, there had an interview that he did several years ago with William Henry Belk, one of the original pioneering giants in the paranormal field. So that's over at apmagazine.info, and we'll of course put all the links in tonight's show notes. So, hey, so before we round out the show, I'm excited to announce that I think I mentioned this last week, but this Friday night, I'm going to be the guest on Truth Wanted, a local, I was going to say Access TV show. That's where its origins were, kind of, but the ACA, Atheist Community of Austin, has a series of streaming shows on their YouTube channel. And, well, they have different channels for all the different shows. You can go to youtube.com/truthwanted, one word.
Okay.
And it'll be live streaming there from 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. That's an hour and a half call-in show. And there's a call-in number that you can call and ask me a question. And it's you can also listen by your computer. There's links that'll enable you to do that. So I'm just really excited about that and thankful that they've reached out and to have me as a guest. And hopefully I'll represent the Anomaly Archives appropriately. So.
Man, I'm going to think of a really hard question for you.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not hard to stump me, but yeah, hopefully we'll have some good conversations. That's really. It
sounds really fun. I'm looking forward to it too.
It's going to be obviously a mostly skeptical crowd, skeptical of paranormal claims and evidence, and but the nature of the show is, what do you believe and why do you believe it? And I really am looking forward to that because I recognize that, my belief doesn't always represent, reality. Like, there's a rational point at which I get to, and then I'm like, well, I don't have evidence for this, but I think it's this way. So anyway, so that's at youtube.com/truthwanted. And of course, you can find the links over at anomalyarchives.org. And I guess that's it for tonight. Mark, any other closing information we should throw out there?
No, just great news roundup. Miles, as always, everybody go to Flipboard. Miles always does the hard work for everybody there. You don't have to spend all the search time, so you can really spend your time at work very focused on what it is you're interested in versus wasting all those precious minutes searching around. So anyway, there's a benefit there as well.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and good night. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, Miles.